Hello, everybody, and welcome to this amazing event. I'm Jeanette Otterbury, the publisher at Otterbury Books, and this is the very first time that we've done an event with two poets and two books. So this is an extremely exciting evening. First of all, we're celebrating James Carter and Neal Layton's A Ticket to Kalamazoo here. I very much hope after hearing them, you'll want to buy a copy of it. It's a very special poetry book for younger children, early years and key stage 1, of which we know there's a great lack. It follows James's Zim Zam Zoom, which is one of our best-selling books on the entire list. James has an incredible talent for writing for this younger age group, which is a very difficult thing to do, to write well for the younger end. He's partnering for the second time with the amazing Neal Layton. They worked together on Weird, Wild and Wonderful for Key Stage 2, but this is their first picture book together. And Neal is an author and illustrator in his own right, and very witty and funny, and also has a real feel for younger children. So this is a wonderful book that's going to bring the joy of poetry to the very youngest child. And then Brian Moses and Ed Boxall. Brian is doing has written his first new solo collection for several years, and we're really proud to be publishing it, Selfies with Komodos. A wonderful, wide-ranging collection from one of our most esteemed Key Stage 2 poets. And you're going to love it. Beautifully partnered with Ed Boxall, who's collaborated with Brian a few times before and on our list as well. And he captures wonderfully the tone of each poem and gets the same sort of range that the words are giving. So it's a wonderful partnership. Ed is also a poet and performer in his own right. All four of the poets go into schools and give fantastic events and workshops. Thank you to Tatty de Jersey, our publicist, for setting up this event. And as always, thanks for the inimitable and amazing Nikki Gamble. And I'm so looking forward to the conversations. I'm going to hand over to Nikki now. Thank you.
Hi, Janetta. Thanks so much. You might not be saying inimitable and all those nice things at the end of the event, but it's nice that you're saying them at the beginning. And it's lovely to be working with Otterbury Books again. I just briefly want to give you an outline of this evening, and then I will crack on and do the bit that you all want, which is obviously to hear from our two poets and our two illustrators. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce Brian and James. I'm going to chat with them briefly and then give them some time to introduce their collections and also to read their poems to you. We're then going to have a wonderful conversation with Ed Boxall and Neal Layton about illustrating poetry. We have some illustrations from the collections too. Brian may not be able to stay until the end, so I am going to give an opportunity for audience questions partway through after Brian has talked about and read from Selfies with Komodos. And I'll be enabling the Q&A function. But please, if you want to, you can ask questions via the chat too. Anyway, in the meantime, please do introduce yourselves, because I know that you like to know who else is online. There'll be some friends that you know, I'm sure. You like to hook up with old friends as well as new people, new book-loving and poetry-loving people. So I think that's all the housekeeping done and dusted. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Brian and James.
Great to be here.
Hi.
You are just going to have to hang fire for a moment because I want to say a few words about each of you before we get cracking. And first of all, welcome to Brian Moses, who I think is without doubt one of our favourite children's poets. And can I say, or should I say, that he has been working in this scene for a good few years, but we won't say how many. And doubtless during that time, he's seen many changes as the fortunes of poetry publishing for children have waxed and waned and hopefully waxed again. Perhaps we'll talk about that in a moment. He has a staggering 200 plus published works, which have sold in excess of 1 million copies. What was that, James? You just folded your arms with a hump when I said
No,
200.
no, I'm enjoying what you're saying. No fun from it.
And 1 million copies. His superb collections include Lost Magic, which is a collection of his best poems, The Monster Sale, and Walking with My Iguana. He's also a respected anthologizer. Collections include What Are We Fighting For? And more recently, the best ever book of funny poems. Amongst his list of honours, he was asked by the CBBC to write a poem for the Queen's 80th birthday, and Walking with My Iguana. I only have to say those words and I'm already feeling the beat of that poem. It is the most listened poem on the Poetry Archive. Wow. Don't worry, James, I'm going to say equally nice things about you too. So James Carter, like Brian Moses, trained and worked as a teacher and then went into writing education titles before becoming a full-time poet. He's very well known for his ability to hold the attention of very young children with his high energy and participative performances, which I have witnessed. And he also has the ability to keep the attention of student teachers too. So, full marks for both of those things. Amongst his collections, The World's Greatest Space Cadet and Weird, Wild and Wonderful, which you can hear a podcast that James and I recorded a couple of years ago for In the Reading Corner. He's also written a series of non-fiction picture poetry books on subjects that include prehistory in Beasts Beneath Our Feet, the solar system in Once Upon a Star, and water, just to name a few, in Once Upon a Raindrop. So much to say about these two that, we could take an hour and a half just with the accolades, but can I just welcome you
Keep going,
both?
Nikki. Keep going.
Thank you, Nikki.
Lovely to have you here. First of all, congratulations to both of you on the publication of these books, which are going to be a fantastic addition to children's poetry. Now, I mentioned that both of you have had careers as teachers. So, Brian, I wonder, how did that inform you as a poet? Was it an important part of you becoming a children's poet?
Oh, it was a very important part. It's when I first started writing poetry for children. And I write something maybe because there wasn't any poetry about a subject that we were doing. And I'd write something. And the children in the class were kind enough to say, oh, we like that, things like that. And I thought, well, maybe if I'm getting through to them, maybe I could get through to other children in this way. And it kind of developed from there.
And what about you, James? Also a teacher. Early years, weren't you?
Well, I trained as early years, but then I did a master's degree very quickly. I ended up as a lecturer, and I was teaching children's literature and creative writing. So I was getting all the trainee teachers writing poetry and children's stories and things like that. But at the same time, my daughters were born. And when my daughters were born, my poetry writing changed completely. It was then that all the younger poems started coming through. So that having children reading Alan Allberg on a nightly, daily basis probably informed my writing more than working in education, perhaps. But I also got to meet lots of poets like Brian. I interviewed Brian and Roger McGough and Benjamin Zephaniah and Valerie Bloom. Sounds like I'm name dropping now, doesn't it?
Well, actually, I think
all that informed.
I think Brian was one of the first poets that you interviewed for your book.
He was indeed. He was. And I had masterclasses from Brian and all these people, and so I was sponging up a lot of great stuff at that point. It was just wonderful.
Now, I actually see quite a lot of connections with the poetry that you write and perform. It seems to me that you are both particularly interested in music, and I would say rhythm. I was saying with Walking with an Iguana, I'm already feeling that beat in my head. Tell us a little bit about music and how important it is to you, and where it was at the beginning of your kind of writing career. I'm going to start with Brian.
Well, I became a poet when I realised I was never going to be a rock star. I started trying to play the guitar, and I realised probably sometime after everybody else had realised that. But and then I decided that I could, underpin the rhythms of poetry with percussion. And that's where I really started, just adding a bit of drumming here and there to the poems, and it seemed to go down well, and the audience seemed to like it, and I carried on. And I also use percussion sometimes for atmospherics in a kind of spooky poem, something like that. I have a thing called a spring drum, which makes a rather spooky, stormy sort of sound that becomes a background to the poems that I'm reading.
So it's a whole acoustic experience.
It is. I mean, I call it my poetry and percussion show. And as you say, I've been doing it for years and years now.
I would say, Brian, it's never too old to be a rock star, and you're a poetry rock star. So.
I think maybe when we're in front of a school audience, we feel that way. The best we can get.
Who were the musicians that influenced you?
Oh, undoubtedly, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. I was privileged to grow up with both those groups, and Bob Dylan. And Jimi Hendrix and all those rock stars from the 60s were just so important. They were really what got me into writing lyrics. The poetry we did at school didn't really touch me, but the poetry of the popular song, really got me focused on lyrics.
That's really interesting, because I was a teacher too, and when I was teaching, I often used Joni Mitchell, Buffy Sainte-Marie. I used her lyrics all the time because they are poetry. They just don't make them like that anymore. Or maybe I'm just getting old.
Well, maybe it's just a different type of poetry. Maybe hip hop is a modern poetry.
Yeah, maybe we'll hear some of that later.
Yeah.
James, do you see that connection between your writing and Brian's writing?
Well, I think we're both obsessed with music. I've been playing musical instruments probably quite badly now since the age of about 13. And I started, when I got my first guitar, age 15, I started just writing songs. I got my guitar home and I thought, what do I play? And I thought, I'll write a song. That's what you have to do. So I just started writing words, and that just continued until I went to train to be a teacher. And I thought, I could be a children's writer. I didn't realize it was going to be very difficult. 5 years later, I stopped writing children's stories and wrote poems. But so I was writing song lyrics and writing songs for bands and things for about 14 years. And song lyrics and poetry are similar in certain respects, but I don't always think that song lyrics stand up necessarily in the way that poetry has to. I could write a song lyric very quickly and it would go into a song and it would have a melody to hold it up. But I think poetry, you have to really work at it. It can take months and months and months to get a poem just crafted. And I still spent many, many months on each poem. And actually most poems I scrap.
That's really interesting.
So I've answered about questions there.
No, I'm going to cogitate on that and think about this idea of music holding the lyrics up, and see what I think about that. I'm going to just think a bit longer. I'm quite interested that you've both been around a little while, and I did suggest in the opening that perhaps the fortunes of children's poetry had sort of waxed and waned, and hopefully waxing again. But I don't know whether that's a fair assessment, and how you see children's poetry and whether it has changed in recent years. Maybe ask you first, James, this time.
Well, I'm going to say, I'm going to answer that by saying that I think that children's poetry is in a very good state right now. I think there's some brilliant new poets writing brilliant new books. And crucially, I think the market's ready. I think probably it seems that most children's poetry is bought by teachers. And teachers now, I mean, I've been doing this job in schools for 20 years. Teachers have changed completely. In the old days, they used to say, poetry's scary, difficult, academic, not relevant. And I don't hear those things anymore. I hear, come in, year 4, love poetry. Year 2, love this. And they're very, very responsive. And so I think we've got some great poets going out there doing great events. And I don't think it's ever been better, personally. But other people like Brian, you might disagree. You've been doing this a little bit longer than me, and thank you, because you were the one who encouraged me to do this job in the first place. So thank you. You've seen a longer trend, but I think it's on the up, isn't it, Brian?
It is on the up. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, James. Absolutely. The only thing that worries me is that it doesn't show in the amount of book sales there are.
No.
I wonder how much this is due to the internet. I mean, I had somebody the other day email me and say, I'm looking for one of your poems. I can't find it on the internet. Would you send it to me? I thought, that's a bit cheek.
But it's like a song. People expect to get songs on YouTube, so maybe it's akin to that.
Yeah,
there's a really serious point here. I mean, a couple of things. So first of all, I want to give a shout out to Janetta and Otterbury Books, as well as other people like Macmillan who, publish children's poetry. But I do want to give a shout out because I think Janetta and her publishing house have made a huge difference.
Absolutely.
But there's also a serious point here. We understand why people want to, get value for money, but unless they support poets like you, there'll be nobody writing poetry. It's hard enough as it is, isn't it, to make a living from this job?
I pointed out to this person that, if I put everything up on the internet, there'll be no reason for people to buy my books.
No.
I select what I put up on the internet, but there's certainly no way I'm going to put everything up.
So we'll just leave that as a point for people to think about. I'm sure that in our audience, we have lots of poetry buyers. We need to get the word out even wider that it's important to support our creative, poets and writers. And
Nikki, can I just add here? I think personally, many people see poetry as a live medium. And I think that's a shame because there's something very special, not just with this book, but there's something really lovely when you open a book of poems and you read through an anthology or a collection. It's not just a live medium, but I think most people think, oh, we've seen the poet, that was it. It's like if you go and see a band, you might want to wear their T-shirt or buy their, sorry, I sound old now, their CD or download something. It's not just for gigs. This, poetry works really well when you pick up a book, and it's a different relationship that you have as a reader when you read it and decode it yourself rather than just listening to the poet interpret it.
Really important point.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, our evening has to move on a little bit, James. So I'm just going to ask you to wait in the wings for a while I talk to Brian. And
yeah,
we get to know a little bit more. Well, we get to know a little bit more about Selfies with Komodos. So see you again in a little while.
Okay.
So Brian, we do want to know more about this latest collection. And I kind of want to ask you to begin with what it is about reptilians that fascinates you so much. We've got iguanas and Komodos. Where does that come from?
I've always been fascinated by reptiles. I started with dinosaurs, as most children do, and then moved on to snakes and iguanas and lizards. And the title of the book really came from an experience I had probably about 20 years ago at Berlin Zoo, where it was the first time I'd seen and been up close to Komodos, and they were such stunning creatures. And I kind of filed it away, and I thought, I'm going to use that one day. And it wasn't till recently that the idea of the Komodos came back. And I suppose most children love reptiles. And I thought, well, Komodos might be a winner there. And I don't know why I linked it up with Selfies. I can't quite remember. But fortunately, it became a poem. And I thought that maybe I'd read that one. As the book's called that, I'll read that one first, if I may.
Excellent.
You'd better not take a selfie with the dragon they call Komodo, or hocus pocus diplodocus. You'll be more dead than a dodo. He won't be a photo in your family book, even if you ask him nicely. The look he gives you shouldn't be ignored. His expression is simply icy. He won't be your dancing partner in your holiday video. He can't be tamed and ridden in some Wild West rodeo. It's no good trying to persuade him. He's always in a bad mood. And don't call round when he's eating, asking to share his food. It's senseless to risk being headless when he closes his mighty jaws, or find that you're suddenly swiped by a flick from his wicked claws. Oh, Komodo, no, Komodo, if what I hear is true, nothing but another Komodo should risk getting close to you.
Well, backstage I could hear, I don't know whether the audience can hear them or not, but I heard backstage people going, yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes, yes. I would love to have gone to see Komodos, and I was due to go and see them, and then along came the pandemic, and that put paid to all of my aspirations. I hope I see them, before I depart from this earth. Now, you're also a great supporter of librarians, I think, Brian.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, librarians do such a brilliant job. And, I know I started to read, and the reading habit was established in the library when I was a child. And I was very fortunate. My mother always took me down there every week to get my books. And it's just so important. And the fact that so many libraries are closing now is such a tragedy.
I wonder whether we could hear another poem which is all about books.
Sure. Yeah, there is a poem about librarians in this book, but this one is one that I wrote particularly for World Book Day, I think it was last year, and it's called Lost in a Book. I'm lost in a book. I'm shaking off snow in the forests of Narnia. I'm with Lyra on the back of a great white bear. I'm rambling with the famous five and climbing the faraway tree. I'm playing Quidditch, but not very well, in the skies above Hogwarts. I'm wandering in Wonderland with Alice. I'm sitting with the boy at the back of the class. I'm leading a warhorse to safety with explosions in our ears. I'm with Barney teaching Stig how to open tins. I'm looking through the wrong end of Rebecca's telescope. I'm in a lighthouse writing letters. I'm finding an angel in a garden shed. I'm training a dragon, meeting Mr. Tom, spinning a web for Charlotte. I'm with Carrie, with Tyke, with Captain Hook. Yes, I'm lost in a book. But please, don't try to find me. I've actually found that lost in a book is exactly where I want to be.
And we'll recognise most of those titles, I'm sure. Have you read all of those books, Brian?
Most of them. There's one or two I haven't.
Can I ask if you have a particular favourite from those?
From that list?
Mm.
I think probably Skellig. I think Skellig is such a perfect book.
Yeah.
And most of what David Harmon writes is tremendous. A book called The Fire Eaters that he wrote too is just brilliant.
Yeah, wonderful. There was one book mentioned there that might be less familiar, depends on when our audience were perhaps reading children's books or teaching. We'll obviously know the classics and maybe the more recent, but if you taught when I was in schools, sort of late 70s and 80s, you'll remember Rebecca's World.
Absolutely. It's just a brilliant book, absolutely brilliant book, and it never fails to get children laughing and enjoying, and also it's a wonderful book for creative ideas too. You can write so many things based on Rebecca's World.
Terry Nation, I think, who was also involved in Doctor Who and writing for that as well. Well, we're back to the reptiles again, because I think we're going to rock and roll. Here's your chance to be a rock star.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to put my cajon on this. This is a mini cajon. My big cajon I sit on and play, but this is a mini cajon. If anybody doesn't know, it's a Spanish drum, and it's got a rather lovely sound. It's got a spring inside. It gives a kind of tinny sound when you beat it. And this is called My Rock and Roll Iguana. And I wrote it because somebody said to me, "Are you ever going to write another iguana poem?" And I've been living very happily walking with my iguana for the last 22 years. And I suddenly thought, well, maybe I could. And I put some ideas together. I had some lines about an operatic iguana to begin with. And then Little Richard, the iconic rock star, died. And I started listening to his songs again, and particularly Tutti Frutti, which has got that wonderful rock and roll line in a wap bap a loop bap a wap bam boom. And I thought that would be something children would love to say in a chorus of a poem. And I thought maybe I should write a rock and roll iguana as a tribute to Little Richard. And so I did. And I'd like to perform it now. If you want to join in on the wop bop a loop bop a wop bam boom, don't hold back. Do join in. My rock and roll iguana can be heard all down the street, from New York to San Francisco. His feet tap out the beat. He's the lizard king of LA, with a twist and a curl of his lip. A lyrical miracle marvel, singing songs that are really hip. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. I'm rocking with my iguana. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. Down at the club Tropicana. Each night he's in the groove, break dancing over the floor. Every lady's dance move he's ready to explore. His dexterity is admired by dancers all around. His steps are light and nimble, keeping everyone spellbound. You want to join in the chorus? It's coming up now. Oh, wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. I'm rocking with my iguana. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. Down at the club Tropicana. And he's found himself a studio by the beaches of Malibu. And he's really having a blast, bringing rock and roll to you. He belts out Long Tall Sally, Tutti Frutti and Teddy Bear, completely at home in the spotlight, a star beneath the glare. Here we go again. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. I'm rocking with my iguana. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. Down at the club Tropicana. And everyone loves my iguana, from the Tyrrell to Tijuana, from Bexhill to Botswana, even Barack Obama. Everyone loves my iguana. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom. A wap bop a loop bop a wap bam boom.
All I can say, you probably couldn't see us, Brian, but our heads were kind of knocked. I'd got the swagger. I wanted to walk with the swagger there. Fantastic. Well, if anybody does have a question for Brian, we've got a quick. You'll need to get your question in quick because we're going to hear from James in a moment. But if you want to add anything to the chat, if you've got a question, please do that now. Because as I said earlier, we've got comments coming in. If
we've
not,
got some lovely comments.
Questions, and a bravo, and it looks like a couple of thumbs up there, so that's fantastic. But no question. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, just that was brilliant.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. Anybody got a question for me? Keep it simple.
They probably haven't had the chance to think properly. So I probably do have to move on to
Sure.
James, but maybe we'll see if anything comes in, and I'll try and bring you back in, Brian, before you have
No
to
worries. No worries.
disappear.
Is that my daughter there going, whoop?
Okay. Oh,
We're back again.
there we go. So, hi, James. You were bopping away there to that. I noticed.
Of course. Well, music's so infectious, isn't it? We can't help but react.
Before you introduce us to Ticket to Kalamazoo, I just wanted to ask you a question, because you once said, or I once heard you say something that I thought was really interesting. Not just one thing. It's only one thing that you said to me.
We say too much.
You said that adults and children approach the reading of a poetry collection in a different way.
Oh gosh, I did, didn't I?
You've done some research, and you found that where adults dip in, children tend to read the whole thing in a linear format, and I found that fascinating.
Well, as far as I can tell, it's true, because if I'm ever selling a book at the end of the day in a school, I see a child walking off and they open it at the first poem. I think it's because they're so used to reading in a chronological way, but I think adults realize that poetry books are not necessarily chronological, and you can dip in and out, and they're good for the loo or for the bus ride or for the train ride or whatever, and you don't necessarily need to read it in the linear or in the sequence that they have been assembled necessarily. So yeah, and I think that children probably have more, sort of sidetrack issue, have more positive attitudes than adults do. If I'm allowed to say this, I think a lot of people are put off poetry by the GCSE anthology, having to deconstruct it. And so a lot of adults go, oh, poetry, yeah, we had to do that for the GCSE English, whereas children don't have that attitude. Actually, most children go, oh, poetry, brilliant. And that's lovely to hear. I think it's adults that sometimes, I think, stop children from having poems. I'm not blaming all adults, and I'm not blaming English teachers, far from it. I just think a lot of people don't want to deconstruct poetry. I just want to put that in the mix there.
Can I just ask you then, that idea that children, to begin with, until they get the experience of poetry, might be reading it in a linear way. Yeah. Does that affect the way that you put a collection together, knowing that?
I hate to admit this, I don't think I ever consciously think of it. I don't think, oh, what would a child like to read? What sequence would they like? I just think, well, what should we? I don't think I ever bring a child into the room at all. But I do think sometimes when I'm writing in the editing of a poem, I might think, would a 5-year-old get this word? No, they wouldn't. It's indulgent doing this. This is purple prose. Or it's too flowery. No, it's a lovely metaphor and I really like it, but tough, it has to go. Or I might think, oh, would a 10-year-old boy be bored by this? Yes, he would. Cut to the chase. Make it shorter. So I don't think of children when I'm assembling it necessarily, or when I'm with Jeanette or when we're discussing it. I don't think the child often comes up. I think it's more when I'm writing, in the editing further down. I think for me, the last thing I ever think is, oh, what do children like? They like pirates. Okay, I'm going to do a book of pirate poems. I wouldn't ever do that. I do what interests me. And so let's say the first poem in this book here is about growing. And I think growing is a fascinating thing. And it's something that I'm not doing anymore, but children are. And I saw my daughters growing incrementally. And I just thought, oh, that's fascinating. Note to self, growing. And later came the poem.
Well, why don't you introduce us to Ticket to Kalamazoo, which is, Brian's collection, we might say, is, for children from around 7. Poetry actually is ageless in so many ways.
It is.
But your collection possibly is for around children from around 4, say, upwards.
Yeah. I don't like putting an age on a poem. If I ever see a book that says poem for 8-year-olds, I'm thinking, oh, really? What happens if a 10-year-old wants to read it? They might be put off if they see 8-year-olds on it. So this is 19 poems, which I've assembled sometime over the last 20 years. There's some really old poems. There's some brand new poems. And what I was most conscious of when I was putting the book together with Janetta was that they're probably going to be read by adults to children. So I want them to be simple and zippy and zappy and just bounce off the page. Do you want me to read a poem? Okay, here we go. Grow
Sorry,
up.
James, I'd handed over to you to take us through.
Oh, I see. Okay, how about poem number 1? This is called Grow Up. I think we'll have a little bit of Steve to introduce it, a little bit of a fanfare. Here we go. I'm sorry, but there's some joining in and there are some actions. Everybody, please say, grow up. Every day, in every way. I grow a little more. Older, higher, wider too, and further from the floor. My head, my hands, my knees, my nose, my teeth, my tongue, my toes. So steadily, so silently, my body very slowly grows. Thank you. Would you like another one? Okay, so this one, a little bit of spacey music, is called I'm a Little Alien. Feel free to join in if you want. I'm a little alien, cute and green, the grooviest guy you've never seen. Speedy like a meteor, sparky like a star, spooky like a moonbeam, gleaming from afar. I whiz round Jupiter, Saturn and the sun. Tss, I'm a little alien. Life is fun. Please clap, humans. Thank you.
There we are. We're clapping for you. Fantastic.
There's a cheeky
James,
one coming up.
I get the sense you haven't properly grown up. Properly is the wrong word. You haven't really grown up yourself, have you?
There you. I'm only 63,000 years old.
Lovely. Before we go on to hear from Neal, we'll go to Neal next because he's going to read one of your poems, isn't he?
Well, I think we're going to do a poem together. We're going to do this one here, in which I'm me, and Neal happens to be a fly.
Wow, fantastic!
So is it possible to get Neal on board because he's got a fly effects apparently? Are you there, Neal?
I am. Can I just make a funny? Can I make a funny noise?
Yes. Hang on, we just need a bit of fly music. Hang on a minute, some gothic fly. Are you ready, Neal?
I'm ready.
Could you give us a sample of your fly, please?
Did you hear that?
Yeah. Here we go. We're so slick here, aren't we? Conversation with a fly. So every time I do this, Neal, could you do the fly noise, please? Conversation with a fly. Hello, fly. What are you up to then? Sorry, I didn't catch that. No, I still didn't get it. Are you trying to tell me something? Something important, perhaps? Is something the matter, maybe? Are you in some kind of trouble? Look, I don't understand. Please don't keep saying. Right, fly, I'm going to give you one more chance, okay? Thank you, Neal.
Very well done. And you've obviously, who needs to be an illustrator? You can just be a fly.
It's fun, I can tell you.
Well, we're going to talk about the illustration of poetry in just a moment, but we have had a couple of questions coming in for Brian. So I'm just going to bring Brian back with an opportunity to talk about one of those questions. And then I'll come back to you, Neal, after that, and Ed. So. And welcome back, Brian.
Thank you.
The question that has gone up in the chat now, but the question that was asked was about when you're putting a collection together, do you think about the balance between rhyming and non-rhyming poetry? Is that part of what you do or not really?
I didn't really think about it. I mean, I've written a lot of poems since Lost Magic was published in 2016. And as I assembled them and worked out which were ones I wanted to put in the book, it was fortunate in that there was a good mix there. There was a good mix of rhyming, non-rhyming, serious, hopefully funny, some sad, spooky, all kinds of things there, and it just fell into place in the end.
Can I ask you a kind of follow-up to that? Do you write a book for a collection, or do you have, do you write a poem specifically for a collection, or do you find that you have a collection of poems and then you make a collection from that, if you see what I mean?
I have done a number of books where we are writing specifically for a collection, like what are we fighting for? Roger Stevens and I wrote about war poems, and James, of course, and I have written a spooky poem collection, and we've written a space collection together. So we are, you have 6 months usually in that situation to write about 25 poems, and I'm always when I used to do those sort of projects, I'd be looking after 5 months at the fact I'd only written about 8 or 9 poems, and sheer desperation sort of would draw the other poems out of me in the last month, so I'd get to my 25.
I think I also read somewhere that you are a great believer in sort of writing in location, not necessarily the final poems, but taking your notebook with you and jotting things down when you're out and about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of poems come to me when I'm dog walking. I'm fortunate to live right in the country, and I get out of my house, cross the village car park, and miles of open fields and hills, and the dog goes off and follows her agenda. I'm quite often speaking into my phone, or dictaphone, or something, and getting ideas down. But then I also, you go to a new place, you go on holiday to a new place, you visit a new place. That gives you inspiration too, and you can, like all writers, I'm an ideas detective, so wherever I go I'm on the hunt for ideas that might turn into poems.
I didn't think you walked a dog. I thought you only walked an iguana, but clearly you've got a dog as well.
Certainly wasn't my iguana, unfortunately.
I'm sorry we have to, I was going to say, I'm sorry we have to end our conversation there as I bring in Neal and Ed, who are going to tell us a little bit more about illustrating poetry collections. But thanks so much for being with us this evening, Brian.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really glad you're going to speak to Ed, because Ed's contribution to my books is always absolutely first rate.
Fantastic.
I'm so pleased that we've linked up.
So let's, you've already met Neal the Fly, who apparently, who was it who said that they were buzzing? Heather says she was buzzing after your presentation there.
I do have a normal voice too, thankfully.
And here's Ed Boxall as well. So Neal is the illustrator of Ticket to Kalamazoo, and Ed is the illustrator of Selfies with Komodos. We're going to have a look at some of the illustrations in a moment, but just a general question to kick us off, and that is whether illustrating poetry requires different considerations to illustrating other kinds of texts, like fiction or non-fiction, for instance. Ed, do you think about it differently?
I should just say I am having a very strange delay on the sound, so it's quite difficult to hear people, but I'll do my best. I might have to talk quite slowly. I think there's a lot more ambiguity in poetry, kind of finding your personal response it's not so kind of specific and dictated what you need to put in your illustrations. So I think often you can have a lot more fun with it and find your personal connection to particular moments or images in the poetry, rather than having to have to put this or that in, like you often have to do in a story.
Interesting. Neal, what's your take on that?
I definitely agree with that. I find it a challenge, probably a bigger challenge than illustrating stories, because poets, they're wordsmiths, and when they give you their poems, they're very distilled down to a very succinct, sort of focused thing, even if it might be imaginative, like Ed says. Some of them, you can take them in different ways. So I enjoy it, but I sometimes it takes me a while to think, how am I going to illustrate this? It's like when Brian was saying some of his poems, I obviously couldn't see Ed's illustrations, and my first thoughts were, how did Ed illustrate that? But yeah, I really enjoy it. Yes, but it's a challenge.
Is there any, can I just ask you, is there any particular instance of that you can tell us about? Was there any poem in particular that you were kind of surprised by in terms of Ed's illustration?
Is that a question to Ed?
No, it was more to you, because you said, how on earth did Ed
Well, I was wondering
that?
the one with all the books, the sort of so much in it, so much, and I imagine that's one of those cases where Ed came in.
Do you mean?
Sort of,
do you mean this one?
Excellent. That's brilliant. Yeah, I can see that now. Yeah.
We're going to have a look at a bit of that one in just a moment.
Yeah.
I wondered I wondered as well as the kind of subject of the poem and what it's actually about, whether there are other elements like the linguistic or the tone or the kind of rhythm, whether you take that into consideration, either of you.
Yeah, Ed first or
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if this is exactly answering your question, but I am often really drawn to the slightly more melancholy and often nocturnal poems. And with Brian's work, a lot of them have this magical nighttime, nocturnal thing going on, and also the ones that are quite tender and melancholy, because there's quite a few in that collection, even though the cover and the overall feel of the book is quite light and fun. There are poems like Things I Haven't Seen Enough Of. Where are we?
Yeah.
Where there's quite a tender, soft sort of ambiguity going on, and I'm not sure if Neal's the same, but I always kind of race through and go to the ones that I kind of connect to and are most drawn to first, and kind of plan those out. And they, they're often those sort of softer, dreamier ones.
Yeah.
And they, a different tone, a different kind of mark making with those softer ones. It's a softer poem, and you can see all the sort of softer oil crayon and ink washes going on that
Nice.
sort of suits the mood. And then other poems have a not exactly cruder, but brighter, simpler sort of
Mm.
vibe going on. A sort of the sort of jokier, funnier poems have a different line, a different way of making marks. So
really
Yeah,
interesting.
because
Sorry,
one collection of poems can cover so much. I mean, so yeah, that's one of the sort of the fun bits of it. I think with the ones that with this particular collection which James sent me, they were all very rhythmic and very kind of musical. So it's really interesting hearing that both Brian and James are very music kind of led, because that was the thing that when I first read them, I thought, I had this sort of, the rhythms going, and I thought I really need to sort of try and pull this out visually, and sort of echo that sort of meter on paper somehow. So
let's have a look
for me,
at
the elephant beat one for me, that was one that did that. I don't know if you got a slide for it, or I can hang.
I'm going to put the slides. I'm going to put the slides on now so we can talk to those as well.
Do you get? Sorry to interrupt. Do you get really, really stuck on some, Neal? Do you have some that you just sort of put off until?
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's what I do. I read all of them, scribble like crazy in the margins, and then there will be a few that I really don't know what to do with. So in this collection, this is quite helpful because my dog's just come in. But Hug Day, I was trying to draw everyone in the whole world, every type of hug that you could imagine, and it just really wasn't working. And then thankfully my dog came to the rescue, and I just suddenly thought, I can, if I just do one hug between a child and a dog, I think this is going to somehow summarize, the poem. But so that was one that came together right at the end. So thanks to my fluffy floof, who's been a bit annoying at the show.
Let's put the slides on and we can have a look at those. I might need to just remove myself.
Okay.
Oh, Nikki's gone.
Hey. And all of a sudden, as if by magic, that weird delay has gone. So, it's back again. It's back again. Okay.
So, Ed.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can just hear you twice.
Okay.
Yeah.
It won't allow me on screen with you, so I'm going to ask you to talk us through these illustrations.
Sorry, I did miss that because the voices are doubling up, and
I was just going to say, because it won't allow us both on the screen at the same time, I wondered whether you could talk us through the 3 illustrations that you've chosen.
Absolutely, no problem. I briefly showed this one before. It, like I was saying, it's sort of finding that personal connection, and this is kind of loosely based on a real librarian I know called Toby from All Library near where I live, who used to get books out for my son and leave them in a special spot for my son to find. And just the sort of visual idea of the text going on the end of the bookcases came along quite quickly, and I thought that was really fun. So it was quite a painless and pleasant illustration to do. So and libraries mean a lot to me, and and because it was I had this particular librarian in mind, it was a real pleasure to do.
Mm-hmm.
Fab. And this is kind of a real classic Brian poem, in a really good way. His sort of world of nocturnal. He writes about all sorts of things. Obviously, writes about everything, but he does really enjoy this kind of nocturnal, spooky world, which I feel very comfortable getting a lot of black in an illustration, dark and shadowy, atmospheric kind of illustration. So these are the ones that I just really, really enjoy doing. And yeah, the illustration to Labrador. And yeah, it's a boy and a dog, so it's a wonderful poem that just gets that sort of joy of Labradors lolloping all over you with pure innocent delight and joy. So yeah, it was great to kind of celebrate that, and again, that personal connection of particularly when my boys were younger, kind of just all their delightful encounters with animals. So yeah, this was a delight to do as well.
It's all right, Ed, I can't find myself now.
There you are.
There we are. So I just want to ask you, do you always work in black and white like this, or is this unusual for you?
Sorry, to work in black and white? I really love working in black and white. I work in black and white a lot. For years and years, I worked pretty exclusively in black and white, doing these quite unusual self-published books that was for many years, that were very specifically black and white, and they were all about being black and white. But recently I've kind of gone into really big full colour, and really sort of embraced colour again. So yeah, but kind of black and white is my comfort zone, really.
It's interesting because there's so much range within it. People think perhaps sometimes that it's one thing, that it's just line drawing, but you've shown through those three illustrations that you chose to share with us what a tonal range there is, and also made, I think, a really important point about single poet collections. Often it is the funny illustration that makes the front cover, but when you really get to read those collections, you get to know that poet in their full tonal range as well.
Yeah.
Should we see what Neal's got to? Should we see Neal's illustration?
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay. All right, can everyone see me? I can't hear anything now. Sorry, I can't hear any of the speakers.
I think you can only hear yourself.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's fine. So I'll just get going. What is curious is I had no idea that Ed was going to show an illustration of someone hugging a dog. And I've done a similar thing for this poem of James for Hug Day. So this is the one which I was really stuck with, because I was trying to sort of somehow draw every hug imaginable. And then my fluffy white dog helped me sort of come up with a simple solution where one hug sort of could cover more. And then the colour as well. I was sort of really thinking of that feeling of a warm hug, so warm colours. But probably the next slide. I did the type at the top, the hug day, so that even the type is a bit sort of squishy and all the letters are cuddled up together.
Can I just ask you there, Neal, because obviously books are designed, were you instrumental in choosing the back cover? Because there's some very strong colours on the pages of this book. Were you instrumental in deciding those colours?
Yeah. So I did. Well, there's an amazing designer, Ari, who designed it all. So I worked with her, but I did. Yeah, I specified lots of the colours. I think she changed a few things. We collab, but yeah, I was imagining using the page, filling each page with a colour which I would then work against with my illustration. And then I did some of the hand lettering of the titles to sort of tie the title with my drawing. Oh yeah, Grow Up. So James read this one. And yeah, when I read it, I just could almost feel, it reminded me of my daughter sort of desperately trying to go taller, being on tiptoes. So that was the first thing I started to draw was sort of children really, just trying to make themselves grow. And then I wanted everything in the poem to kind of convey that feeling of upwardness. So the ground obviously is the one sort of static gravity based thing, but everything else is going up. So I put the sun in because it's a lovely warm thing to sort of be feeling like you're reaching towards. And then that naturally led to sort of putting flowers in, and the flowers are obviously grow up towards the sun and the heads move towards the sun. And then the clouds and the birds, another sort of thing up there that is hopefully conveying this feeling of growing, to echo James grows where the poem finishes. And the characters in the book, there's sort of, I made a little sort of cast of 6 characters, so they sort of populate all the poems, the same children. So 3 of them ride the elephant on the cover, and on the next one, which I think is elephants. Yes, elephant beat. So this is one of the very rhythmic ones, bobbing to the rhythm of the elephant beat as it pounds round town on its 4 great feet. This was in my head all night, when I was thinking I'm going to illustrate it. So with this, I was imagining, a bit like music works in, circles. Your 4 bars generally come round again. So I sort of did a circle of elephants, and the elephants, to me, were meant to sort of echo the sort of the meter or the bars coming round, and each elephant has one of my cast of children from the book on it. So that's what I was sort of doing with that poem. Yeah, really trying to pick up on James' very sort of musical, rhythmic sort of vibe to the poem.
Can I just ask you? Yeah, absolutely. Can I just ask you, the idea of the cast of characters, did that come right at the beginning, or did you have to? It did.
Yeah, that was actually, when Ed was talking about some things sort of kind of come easily, and for some reason that was the first thing that I drew was the sort of the cast of characters, the children that were going to sort of be in the book, because I thought I wanted the poems sort of flowed and related to one another to me, and I wanted to somehow reflect that, and sort of having the same children popping up through the book was a way of me linking the poems and creating continuity, even though they're each quite sort of separate things. and it just sort of reminded me a bit of, I've done a few sessions with very young children. There's a thing called Boogie Mites, which is rhythmic music related sort of learning for young children, and that was sort of in my head as well, where children sort of sit in a circle and you sort of that's what I was imagining, a group of children sat round doing a poetry session. That's sort of what was in my head when I started it.
I'm going to bring back Ed and James now. So if they're eating their sandwiches, they have to stop. They're not eating their sandwiches, everybody. That was just me saying that. I'm going to open it up for audience questions. So I will be taking questions from the chat if you'd like to leave any questions in there. But I'm going to start with an observation from Sarah. She wasn't specifically asking a question, but she made a really important point, I think. James, she says, you make writing for young children look so easy. And from experience, she says, I know it isn't. There is this assumption that for very young children, it's going to be easy to do it.
Not at all. In fact, as I said earlier, before I had children, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't even dream of doing it. But it just came from reading my children picture book after picture book, Alan Orberg's and all that, particularly Alan Orberg. I loved Alan Orberg, and my daughters did too. And those rhythms and things all fed into what I started to write. And my daughter Lauren would pick up a caterpillar and go, look, Daddy, there's a caterpillar on the wall. I go, oh, hang on. She said, Daddy, what are you doing? I'm making a note of that. Caterpillar on the wall, caterpillar creep and crawl, and it just fed in. It's really hard. As I just wrote to somebody here on the sidebar, 90+% of what I write for young children just ends up sentimental, twee, crass, obvious, and I don't want to be any of those things. So I just scrap it all. But I keep going as hopefully I get to a point where I go, there we go. This is exactly. I tried the growing up poem, the one we just saw. I must have written about 10 different versions of that over the years. And I nearly had it about a few years ago. Then I thought, no, it's not working. So I started it all over again. And that one, I always open up my my shows nowadays with, I get the children doing grow up every day. So we do it as a call and response. And call and response, I find, sorry, veering off here as ever, is a lovely way of getting children involved with you. So rather than passively listening, particularly with younger children, I get them to do things with me constantly.
Can I just ask our two illustrators as well? I remember long ago when I worked in teacher education, and I was sharing picture books with colleagues from different departments, including the art department. And one of the books that I showed was Eric Carle, Draw Me a Star, and the art tutor flung it to one side and said, this is all, like all children's books, it's childish, he can't draw properly. Do you think there's also an assumption that if you make something childlike, that people think that that's easier in art as well?
Ed, what do you think about that? Sorry, I'm sure you got something.
Just because I'm sorry to keep going back to it, but just because I'm getting this strange effect on the voice, could you just clarify the question?
Well, this idea that if something has a childlikeness to it, that somehow that is easy, that art is easy because it's got a childlikeness. I'll give you another example. Sometimes when I see on television programs, there's a school, a classroom, and there's some art on the wall supposed to have been drawn by a child, but you can tell immediately that it hasn't been. It's this assumption that somehow childlike art is easy, simple, in the same way that writing for young children is simple and easy. And I just wondered what if you had a view on that.
Funnily enough, what pops into my head, because I have kind of taught illustration, some of the only people I can think of who have had that sort of attitude are illustration students who kind of, some illustration students have that real obsession with sort of being very, very realistic and kind of trying to get it to look like a photograph and all that kind of thing, and doing really good shading. And I remember this one guy in Hastings on the degree course, kind of just looking at my work and just thinking, how has this guy got the nerve to teach me when his work is sort of so supposedly sort of simple, you know? So I mean, sometimes people have that sort of attitude, and you know, it's they're just wrong, and they've haven't.
I think if it looks easy, you're doing something right.
Yeah,
because and I mean, artists, like, you know, this debate's been going on in art since, you know, modernism, hasn't it? You know, Miro, people like that.
Yeah.
So the simplicity is a difficult thing to strive for.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, it is something you come up against. I'm sure poets do as well. If they've written a short poem,
Yeah.
some people might say, "Oh, that looks very easy," and
but
it probably does look effortless, and that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
It works because you can't see the craft, you can't see the hours. You know, it's a self-contained thing,
and it's difficult to put something that's very visual into words. It's very difficult, you know, to say why a drawing or illustration is amazing, you know, because it's visual, and to put it into words is really difficult. I find that really hard with, you know, working with kids and trying to convince them that their illustration, their drawing is really, really good. They often just think you're lying, you know, because, you know, it has this innocence and immediacy and freshness. And you try and communicate why you think it's amazing, and sometimes they just aren't convinced, because they sort of have this idea that things should look like a photograph and have beautiful, careful shading and all that stuff, you know.
I love that idea that simplicity is something to strive for. That's going to stick with me. There was a question earlier on about which I can ask to both of you, but I'll ask to James first, and that is whether you've ever considered doing artwork for your own poems, and to the illustrators, whether you've considered writing poems to go with your artwork. So maybe start with James.
Oh gosh, no. My drawing skills are... I draw in front of children and they laugh at it. So I use it for comedic purposes, but I would never. And actually, I want everything to be actually in the poem. And sometimes I do a shape poem, as you can see, like a woolly mammoth from Zim Zam Zoom. But that's a different thing, because you're trying to bring out the overall shape or the theme or whatever. But I'd never no. For me, I imagine that the poem would never be illustrated, and all the imagery has got to be in there. So if it is illustrated, even better, it's a bonus. There's got to be enough eye candy, as I tell children. There's got to be enough imagery in there so you can see even a hint of a colour or a shade or a tint or just a little suggestion of something, so you can see visually as you read the poem. So if somebody like Neal or Ed comes along and illustrates it, even better, because it helps children to sort of to realise that, I guess.
Ed, you went to get a book. Is this for a poem that you've written?
How did you know I went to get a book?
I saw you.
I just went across the room and got something. But yeah, I did. Yeah, because I mean, I write as well, and I write poems and write stories all the time, and often and so the answer to that question is I do that a lot. I'll come up with I'll have a picture first or a visual idea first, and then write something to go with it. So I did get a book. I mean, like, you know, this is a thing. I drew this guy, this eccentric kind of, where is he?
Yeah,
I drew this eccentric guy, and then wrote the poem to go with him afterwards. So I do that all the time.
So in that case, maybe I'll ask Neal, what is it that words do that pictures can't, and what is it that pictures do that words can't?
Oh gosh.
That's one for the start of the
I
evening, not
think
the end.
I think writing for me, or reading poems, or reading the written word, for me is really like being inside someone else's head. And I think for me, books is the closest or poems is the closest we can kind of get to be inside someone's head. And I think illustrations can sort of, if it's illustrating something like that, it can enhance it and sort of, like if you go and see a play, the lighting and the music will give kind of cues to the audience and sort of help push the narrative in certain directions, or heighten things or whatever. And for me, that's the sort of job of the illustrator, to look at what the author's intent is, and to try and add the lighting, or add some lighting or some music or something, a different art form that will sort of fortify what they're trying to do, if that makes sense. Because pictures, colour hits you very quickly. It doesn't take time to read words. The colour's going to hit you straight away. Yeah. And if it's a composition, similarly, can hit you very quickly. And all those impressions then start to engage the reader before they've even started reading the words, you know what I mean? So, I think of it of like sort of film directors or theatre people or something like that.
Interesting. We've got a question, and it's a good question to round up on. I'm just going to tell everybody in the audience what we're going to do. I'm going to ask that question, and then James is going to read us out of the event with one final poem, and that will be the end of the event. But before we get there, it's a question from Deborah. And Deborah wants to know from each of you what you do to celebrate a book birthday. So when your book is published, what is it that you do to celebrate? Ed, what do you do?
I'm obviously really, really excited and delighted about books being published. Really, I have such joy that books are published. But if I'm perfectly honest, the actual day it comes out I don't find particularly exciting. I'm sorry, that's not a great answer. The day I find exciting is when it comes through the post and you have that book in your hand and you see that the book is actually real. Yeah, that's when I'm jumping around the room and getting excited. Yeah.
Good answer.
Neal, do you have anything that you do to celebrate?
Symmetry, the first time you see it is amazing, and then when you realise that the book is out there, I do feel slightly nervous, but I like to show it. I'll probably show it to my family, and then if I feel like they're on board with it, I think yes, then hopefully other people are going to like it. Yeah, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, actually, I think, for me.
I am wondering whether you're amongst that group of writers that goes around bookshops and turns your book cover outwards so that everybody can see it rather than the spine. James, how are you celebrating?
For me,
James, how do you celebrate?
Well, I don't, because I think that when a book comes out, I'm like the other two. I'm kind of like hide, and I don't want to. I kind of, oh no, I might be wrong, and maybe this isn't any good, and I worry about it. So, and I really think it's not until a few years later that I can go, oh, that one was okay. Oh no, I shouldn't have published that one. No, that's not right. And and as the book arrives in the post in the jiffy bag, brilliant. But it's like as soon as your baby goes into the world, you think, oh no, people might not like this. They might just be polite until this point. So, but I'm really thrilled with this. But I hope the world loves it, because what really matters is that children like it. And that takes a long time to hear if children like it or not. You go to schools and you might see them reading a bit, go, oh, they're reading it. Or they might say, I like that one. I go, oh, they like the one with the fly. I go, oh, okay. Thank you. And that's lovely. And that matters more than what adults think. If adults say something nice, that's nice. But it's when children say something nice, it really, really, really pleases me.
Very interesting. So can I say that also, of course, another thing that you do to celebrate your books is talk to 90 people online about them with new technology that you've never used before, and it all works out okay in the end. So can I just thank Ed, Brian, who's not with us now, Neal, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to Janetta and to Otter Barry Books. We're going to duck out now and leave the final word to James Carter, who's going to read us out of our event. So good night, everybody, and thank you for joining us.
Happy poem. Happy poem. Happy as a rainbow, happy as a bee, happy as a dolphin splashing in the sea, happy as a holiday down on the beach, happy as a sunflower, happy as a peach, happy as a bunny, happy as a spoon, dripping with honey, happy as June, happy as a banjo plucking on a tune, happy as a Sunday lazy afternoon, happy as a memory shared by two, happy as me when I'm with you. Thank you for listening.